I'm Herbie Gaylord, and this is Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms, a podcast where we celebrate our state's educators and explore the future of learning. In this mini-series called Lessons Learned, we're pausing to reflect on some of our favorite takeaways from Season 1 of Bright. In today's episode, we explore themes on the need for equity in education. First up on this issue, we've got Kyron Harvell, the director of the School Culture and Climate Grant at Lansing School District, who shares his perspective on pervasive equity issues in education.
So what I'm seeing in terms of equitable access to opportunities, poverty, social justice, schools and school districts that have been labeled as being in low performing or areas where there are high rates of poverty are not receiving the same level of service. The curriculum is not as strong. They're not receiving the same supports. And I think that's just totally wrong. So I do feel that's a major issue that needs to be addressed. And I know people can say, well, they pay higher property taxes there. Again, we have to eliminate those barriers and stop looking at money. We're talking about kids. Kids do not have a determination on where they live and how they grew up and what their zip code is, nor should they be penalized for that. So I'm really big on social justice, equal access to opportunities, and the whole thing about poverty. We have to get past just saying, because what happens with poverty is we put a stigma on that. Well, they're poor. Now it becomes a crutch. Poverty doesn't mean the kids can't learn. Poverty doesn't mean that parents will have desire for their kids to achieve and obtain the same things as those families who may seem to be in the 1% of the upper class. Ultimately, I believe that all parents want the best for their kids. That mom that has 5 kids and working 3 jobs wants the best for her kids, like the mom that's married and has 2 kids and doesn't have to go to work. That mom that has 5 kids may not be able to make the parent-teacher conference, not because she doesn't care, but because she has to go to work. So I think I want to help to eliminate that stigma around poverty. Let's recognize it exists, and recognize it exists. Let's work towards eliminating the barriers around poverty. And that's going to come through social justice and providing equity. So let's say we know there are some have-nots. How do we make them the haves? Rather than just saying they're the have-nots, oh, well, I'm sorry, you're in the school. There are schools in Detroit where the kids have to go home to get toilet paper, or their parents have to bring toilet paper to the school. There's leaky ceilings. But then if you go 15 miles down the road to some other districts, it looks like a palace. How is that equitable? But then the kids are being measured by the same standards when we take the M-step. There are kids going through gang areas to get to school and dodging bullets and getting into fights, or little girls dodging pedophiles in the community. But then they're compared with the same kids who get a ride to school in other more affluent areas. And this isn't a knock against people that have money, but we have to start working more for those that do not have. So let's look at poverty and look at ways to address it versus just that stigma associated with it. Because the stigma is if you're in poverty, then you don't have the desire to do more. And, oh, well, that's your lot in life. You're never going to come out of it. You can't change. So those are the things. And I think that's all going to come through providing equal access to opportunities. That's how we eliminate poverty and issues around social justice, through equity.
You can hear more from Kyron in episode 13 of Bright, titled Becoming a Voice for the Voiceless. Next up, we have Joy Taylor, a teacher consultant at the Washtenaw Alliance for Virtual Education, who shares her vision for what needs to change for all children to have equitable opportunities to unlock their unique gifts and talents.
For equity, I think legislators need to look into changes to ensure that equity is for every student. Every student has an opportunity to a quality education. And it needs to be more than just lip service. Some action needs to be put in place. I told somebody I don't want to say I'm getting numb, but I hear it, but I want to see action in place, and include. I'm glad that now we have someone in office whose wife is an educator. So I'm hoping that this is going to be a benefit for us. So many times people have been put over education who do not have an education background. So to me, it's really hard for people who don't understand education or who haven't been there in working in it to understand the education process. And so I really hope that equity is really looked at, and the legislators really have to be conscious about making sure that equity is for all students. And when I say all students, I'm talking about students of color, I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about, race, I'm talking about urban city areas, social class, because I'll use this example. My children went to school in the suburbs, and they were able to they were introduced to some things that some of the students in the city where I worked in Detroit weren't introduced to. And I thought that was so unfair, because some of our students have skills and talents that they never even were able to explore because they didn't even know about it. So how can I explore a talent or a gift and I never have been exposed to it? And I think about this, my daughter, she used to always draw on the walls or whatever. We knew she was going to do something in art. But an architect, she ended up taking an architecture class in high school, and she took her first class, and she ended up winning second place in the state competition, where it was kids who was taking architecture classes for 4 years. But we would have never known that architecture was her area had she not had the opportunity to take the course, So I think that's really important, is the equity and funding for schools to have these programs. At every school should have it, not just the suburb schools or the schools on the Upper Peninsula or the schools on the more affluent side of the state. Every school should have these programs.
You can hear more from Joy in episode 2 of Bright, titled Valuing versus Acknowledging Diversity. Next up, we have Kerry Downs, who was a classroom teacher in Flint for 18 years before becoming the director of the Flint Community Education Initiative, where she now works to bring community partners together to support Flint teachers, students, and families. Though she's not speaking directly about equity here, we find the model for community partnerships she proposes relevant and compelling. We're up against big issues, she argues, and schools cannot bear the full burden of addressing these systemic problems alone.
I think for so many years we have asked teachers to be the answer to everything, to have wear 10 different hats, be teacher, but counselor, and then also family engagement specialist. We're asking teachers to do all of this. And what happens, I think, ultimately is it really does play a toll on our teachers about they should get to focus on being this lead educator, about being this great kind of innovative instructionalist who really gets to focus on making sure the kids do great learning, right? I'm sure that teachers, and as I recall as a teacher, all along you're thinking, what else can I find to add to kind of my tool belt to support my kids in being successful? My greatest piece of advice, I would think, if you don't have an opportunity to have a partner for community education, although from my perspective, we have 13 schools that we partner with, but every school should be a community school. They really should. Every school, we should be providing as many kind of opportunities for families and kids that we can, because when the family's thriving, students are better off, right? They're better supported to be successful. But I would say if you're in a position, if you're in a rural setting or you're in a location where you feel like you don't have the support, I would get together with other teachers and identify your key priorities and then reach out to any of your local organizations. So if in your school the key priority is making sure that kids have all their basic needs met for maybe health and social emotional learning, I would sit down with maybe 3 or 4 teachers, share the workload. I would brainstorm together about what our priorities are. I'd keep it very attainable. I would not overwhelm myself, but I do it with a group of teachers and say, what's our first goal? And if our first goal is to make sure that our kids are connected to a primary care physician and that they have some type of insurance program to make sure that that happens, that they stay connected, then I'd reach out to the local healthcare organizations and let them know this is our interest and what can you put together for us. The benefit we have in our organization is we have someone at each site, that community school director, who convenes all of those partners. And so as soon as a school, and one of the great things about our community school directors, and many of them have background in education or youth development or social work, but one of the I would say the best characteristics that they possess is they're good listeners. They do not, our directors never walk into a school assuming that they know the needs and that they know what all the answers are. They go in, they do a needs assessment, they listen to find out what are the teachers noticing, what are staff members noticing, what are parents lifting as their needs, what are kids showing us, what are kids saying they want. And so those directors really kind of are great listeners, and then they're also kind of great researchers, right? They look and find and seek those resources. If I did not have a community school director in my school, I would partner with some other teachers to share the workload, find out what our number one priority is, and then reach out and start asking questions to figure out how to best connect. And I have found, in my experience, oftentimes there are organizations, businesses, nonprofits in every community who are very eager to partner with schools, but because of the intensity of curriculum and standardized testing and kind of absolutely the transition that education has experienced in the last year, sometimes the staff at the school don't have a kind of a doorway for partners to come in and work with them. And so oftentimes it's a simple ask. It's a reaching out to a local hospital and say, what can you provide for us? This is what we're seeing as a need. What do you have? Or reaching out to your local nonprofits to find out what they can offer, what they can provide. In our experience, we've identified key partners for all of our components. So for after-school programming, we partner with Youth Quest, which is an after-school program. It's run by the Flint and Genesee Chamber of Commerce, and they do amazing after-school programs. We have a lead partner, and we bring more partners in to do more specialized activities, but we have a lead partner to facilitate that. We have a lead partner, Genesee Health Plan, that supports our community health workers in connecting families for resources. But again, I would partner with other teachers, identify our first priority, and then get aggressive about asking people, what can you bring to the table to help our kids? And I would go with the idea that the expectation is partners are ready to invest in our kids.
You can hear more from Kerry in episode 5 of Bright, titled It Takes a Village to Educate a Child. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Bright, where we synthesized some of our lessons learned from Season 1 on what's needed to create more equitable learning environments for our students. The Bright podcast is produced by me, Herbie Gaylord, is hosted by Nikki Herda, and is made possible by Michigan Virtual, a nonprofit organization that's leading and collaborating to build learning environments for tomorrow. Education is changing faster than ever. Discover new models and resources to move learning forward at your school at michiganvirtual.org.